The order Carnivora is a family tree with a deep fork between two main branches. In the preceding video, I talked about the half of that clade known as Caniformes, the dog-like branch. This video focuses on Feliformes, the clade that includes cats. The point of both of these and of this whole series is to explain how evolution is indicated and vindicated at various levels and myriad ways, and how it could be tested and potentially falsified. But I also intend to illustrate the absurdities of creationist claims as compared to the actual science they deny and deliberately misrepresent in a determined attempt to misunderstand it.
I don't understand evolution, and I have to protect my kids from understanding it. We will not give in to the thinkers!
A common but completely reversed and probably purposeful misperception among anti-science denialists is that no new biological variation may be produced without crossbreeding an existing form with another unrelated one, so that the product would be an infertile hybrid. But of course this is not what evolution actually proposes. Instead, any given population has the potential to produce two or more distinct subsets which may subsequently subdivide into an array of diverging lines, each adapting a template established by the original ancestor of all of them. This is nicely illustrated with a look at cats, a well-known and highly diverse group that obviously erupted from a single ancestor, not separate creation events, and not through crossbreeding with any other kind. Evolutionary theory holds that any given lineage will develop their own uniquely distinctive affectations, such as the very different facial shapes seen here with Persian and Siamese cats. Another example are Sphinx cats, which are hairless, and Manx cats, which are tailless, each due to inherent genetic expressions unique to those derivations, but they're still obviously related to Siamese and Persian cats as well as all the rest, even embarrassing relatives like this. Do all these variations stem from one ancestor common to all of them, meaning that they were all derived by evolutionary means, or were they separately and supernaturally created? And what about all the still wild varieties like sand cats or the black-footed cat? Do all these family branches stem from one original lineage? What about leopard cats like the Pallas cat or the flat-headed cat? What about more exotic cats like the Latin American ocelot or the African serval or the Canadian lynx? Are they biologically related, meaning that all these cats once shared the same ancient grandparent? All the different breeds of house cat are in fact still the same species, Felis sylvestris. Yes, the sophisticated scientific name was inspired by this cat. A lot of these other cats are subsets of what might be considered a sister species, once known as Felis catus, which is virtually identical genetically. Creationists commonly contend that all cats are the same species, but they're not. There's a good deal of chemical fertility between different species of the same genus, but the more they drift apart, the more complications arise in trying to crossbreed them. Hybrids will be infertile and often plagued with dysfunctions until eventually the genetic match of even obviously related species will become so different that they can't even produce hybrids anymore. At that point, two genetically isolated populations will no longer be influenced or restricted by the other's gene pool, but their genealogy can still be identified with genetic markers. Turning to a genomic research study detailed in Scientific American, we see that house cats and leopard cats were once the same cat roughly 6 million years ago. A close relationship has been identified between pumas and cheetahs, too. The primary difference between them is that in order to become the fastest cat, the cheetahs sacrificed their ability to retract their claws. The fossil record also shows that cheetahs emerged in North America along with the preceding divisions of bobcats and lynx. The immediate ancestor of all those mentioned so far likely looked like a leopard cat, like Jeffrey's cat, the pampas cat, ocelot, oncilla, or the adorable margay. They in turn evidently descend from something like Pardaphilus, which we now know as the marbled cat. These are similar to clouded leopards and snow leopards, but they also mark a transition between two distinct divisions. All extant cats are either panthers or felines. Even big felines like cougars and caracals have more in common with codcods and calicos than with any panther. Likewise, if you shave off the mane of a lion or bleach out the stripes of a tiger, there's not a lot of difference left between them, like there is between tigers and tabbies. Neither is there any significant difference between a leopard and a jaguar, but a jaguar is very different from a jaguarundi, and you still wouldn't confuse a leopard cat with an actual leopard. One of the problems this creates for creationists is that panthers and felines are both well represented even in the most ancient Egyptian artifacts, meaning that if Noah only took 2 cats on board his ark, it would then require a super-uber-hyper-caffeinated electro-mega evolution to explain why we suddenly have modern lions and familiar felines both present immediately after the flood, And of course that still wouldn't explain why we have leopard-like forms rendered in cave paintings tens of thousands of years before the flood. Remember, it is possible to hybridize various felines, although not all of them, and it is possible to hybridize panthers too, although they will usually be infertile freaks. The best example of that is this magnificent monster known as the liger. But it is much less likely for a panther and a feline of equal size to produce anything at all other than blood and mayhem. So did God make different kinds of cats? Why make different kinds of one kind and then add other kinds within that kind? The way it really works is that as a population fans out and certain groups become isolated from the dominant gene pool, they begin to show differences from their cousins in other regions. The first significant stage of this variation is the breed or subspecies. For example, the Siberian, Bengal, and Indo-Chinese variations of the tiger can still interbreed, but they don't because they're isolated geographically. If this remains so long enough, they may be isolated genetically too and become distinctly different species. For example, the saber-toothed tiger is not a tiger at all. It's not even a panther, nor is it a feline. It's actually a handful of different species of dirk-toothed and saber-toothed cats in their own unique genus, Machaerodontidae. These have skeletal characteristics such that they seem to be a very early branch apart from either extant branches of the felid family tree. Their whole line is now extinct, and there is a popular notion that they evolved into modern cats, but they apparently didn't. What we know of their DNA reveals that they were indeed cats, but they were more distantly related to modern cats than modern cats are to each other. This shouldn't be surprising either, since scimitar cats appear in the fossil record 5 million years after the genetic divergence indicated between panthers and felines, and there were lions living alongside smilodons both in Europe and in North America. Moving on to the next taxonomic level, there was another line of scimitar kitties around at the same time and for a long time prior, dating all the way back to the Eocene. These were the nimvirids, represented by Nimvirus, Eusmilus, Dinictus, and the awesome Barbarophyllus. They were quasi-cats, but not quite cats. They had retractable claws and little more than a slight difference in the structure of the middle ear to keep them distinct from true cats. But in the end, the amazing resemblance between Barbarophyllus and Smilodon was just a curiously convergent trend at the time, one which also coincidentally occurred in contemporary creodonts like Hyaenodon and even the very distant marsupial Thylacosmilus. None of these animals made it onto Noah's Ark for some reason. So we turn to another massive collaborative analysis of the molecular phylogeny of Carnivora. This one duplicates the results already confirmed in caniforms, but uses twice the participant species, including feliforms, and even cross-confirms itself by subjecting all the genomic data to two different types of analysis, but with virtually identical results. Thus we have a genetic confirmation of what we had already figured out morphologically, that the various genera of panthers, felines, and scimitar cats are the main branches of the family Felidae, which began with a single progenitor alongside nimvirids, but were more closely related to viverids, which were karyotypes of everything with a felid affinity. Living fossils in the sense that they retain the generalized features revealed at the dawn of all feliform families. This applies especially to Nandinia, the African palm civet, genetically identified as the most basal of all extant feliforms. So nimvirids just looked like cats in the same sense that hyenas look like dogs. But in fact hyenas are feliforms, not caniforms. There were once so many hyena species in the fossil record that their complete evolution is fully documented with every link accounted for, but now there are only 4 species left, including the aardwolf, which isn't a wolf at all, since it's more closely related to cats. When you get to the bases of related clades, they begin to look very much like each other until it's difficult to tell them apart. Look at viverids, for example. They emerged in the Paleocene and are well represented in the fossil record. Some are still around today, too. They also have retractable claws as well as the same type of scent glands typical of cats. This is the group where we find civet cats, meerkats, bearcats, and polecats. No, wait. Polecats are more closely related to dogs than cats. And while we know there were literal bear dogs and dog bears once upon a time, the binturong is not really a bear cat. You can't have a bear cat unless you find one of these. Amazingly, though, you can actually have a sort of cat dog. Now, just to clarify, I'm not talking about distinctly different families interbreeding, nor am I ignoring tens of millions of generations of genetic divergence. Instead, I'm looking back at the base of this tree, at the fork of the primary division. just as gennets look like cats as well as foxes, and some foxes look like cats. The first canid ever looked very much like a genet fox, and being arboreal, it even had partially retractable claws. This is another reason Hesperocyon counts as a transitional species. Miacids were the first clade of carnivora, but where did they derive from? There were more animal families apparent in the fossil record than exist today, and the mammalian subclasses were once much more fundamentally diverse. Of the original half-dozen or so of the most basic therian divisions, only 2 are still plentiful, with the third group being barely represented and almost entirely extinct. Otherwise, all modern mammals fall into one of only 2 remaining groups, placentals and marsupials. The earliest placentals emerged in a world dominated by dinosaurs. Then, in their absence, these furry survivors flourished into numerous branches, many of which have since diminished and died out.
I wonder why these creatures no longer exist.
Perhaps the ark was too small to allow them entry and they perished in the flood.
The Myocoids were sister clade to another now extinct order called Creodonts. Their curious relationship to pangolins has now been confirmed genetically, but the exact source of their shared parent clade is as yet unresolved. Ferae is nested amongst or within a confusing paraphyletic collective tentatively known as condylarths. This assemblage is difficult to adequately define because it shows a series of transitions from the most primitive insectivores through feral predators and even eventual ungulates. While there is little resemblance between later branches, the original members of each group were virtually indistinguishable. There were several subsets of condylarths, including mesonychids. There were several species of those, too, and Noah never saw anything like them. It has been said that some of these transitions were very much like sheep's and wolves' clothing because they had tiny hooves instead of claws. They also had no shearing teeth, but were otherwise like having the traits of carnivores and creodonts mixed with those of primitive pigs and deer. Creodonts weren't so generalized. They at least had somewhat binocular vision. For 20 million years, the dominant predators in some areas were creodonts. They had claws and shearing carnassial teeth just like carnivores, and some even had considerably more bite force. But creodonts were neither as fast nor as efficiently designed, and certainly not as smart as carnivores were getting to be. Modern carnivora are very skillful, athletic, and highly intelligent with well-adapted senses along with a degree of pattern recognition and even some comprehension of language and social cues. This explains their ability to hunt as a coordinated effort. It also explains the apparent contradiction of why some of the most accomplished killers are among our favorite pets. Obviously, this also explains how they replaced their creodont cousins who could no longer compete in any capacity. So for those who believe that evolution means one thing turning into something completely different, or dogs giving birth to cats or something equally ridiculous, take a look at these 2 karyotypical gennets. Neither of these are cats nor foxes, though they already look like both. This is how it begins. Imagine these 2 represent literal cousins. The descendants of one continued to diversify into Viveridae and Felidae, and the other's descendants eventually led to foxes and ferrets, etc. If you were there to see the first appearance of these 2 kits, representing the primary division of Feliformes and Caniformes, would you even have recognized it as a macroevolutionary event?